It's a calm summer evening in the valley. The sun hangs low over the ocean to the east, casting a path of shimmering golden sunlight to the mouth of the river. A group of farmers, tired after working long days in the field, are returning to the village, their shadows cast long behind them. There is a slight rumble, and a young man loses footing, crying out in surprise. The others tease him, but help him to his feet. Earthquakes aren't uncommon in this part of the world, amongst the foothills of the mountains so tall that even in the height of summer they are crowned in snow. He laughs sheepishly, and the group continues on. Then there's a second tremor, and the mood shifts. The talking stops, and people pause to nervously look around. Then there's a third, a crack spreading down the path they are walking on, widening into a gaping fissure. An avalanche of stone and debris comes crashing down from the mountains above. This is Tellus, a world once unparalleled in beauty. Its vast landscapes, temperate climate, and thin blue atmosphere nurtured life and allowed magic to flow as freely as water. Civilization thrived and legends were born, and every valley, mountain, and plain was storied of empires that rose and fell, of heroes defying the odds, and gods who walked among mortals. Even the ordinary was touched by the extraordinary. Farmers, tilling their soil, knew they did so, enriched by centuries of myth and magic. But then came the Sundering, a cataclysm that tore Tellus apart, splitting it into two worlds, Trovia and Ilion. Now, locked in an eternal dance, the twin worlds orbit each other, their scarred surfaces a testament to the calamity that birthed them. On clear nights, each world loomed in the sky of the other, close enough to feel within reach, yet separated by the vast emptiness of space. For the people of the twin worlds, Tellus has faded into myth, a golden age of dragons, gods and heroes, preserved in fragments of song and legend rather than history. The decades immediately after the Sundering nearly drove life on the twin worlds to extinction. Volcanic ash and debris clouded the atmosphere and choked springs and rivers. The survivors were forced underground, subsisting on lichens and cave algae, until the day the sky cleared, the water ran clean, and the survivors emerged out onto a broken and alien world, begin the painstaking work of rebuilding. From here, the path of Trovia and Ilion diverged. On Ilion, remnants of Tellus' advanced technology and architecture allowed for some preservation of the culture and knowledge of the old world, but this preservation came at a cost. Their reliance on the past led to a culture of stagnation, enabled by the belief that they were true heirs of Tellus' legacy, and their duty was to preserve rather than innovate. On Trovia, the people were less fortunate. Trovia's survivors facing harsher conditions and fewer resources. Their struggle to survive drove them to innovate, creating a culture of rapid experimentation and progress. For Trovians, the legacy of Tellus lay not in its ruins or relics, but in the enduring spirit of discovery and innovation. That is the background of the setting of the twin worlds, of Trovia and Ilion. A high-fantasy world-building project that I want to flesh out into a living, breathing world. Or at least that's a high-concept idea anyway. It's a plan to use this channel to document my progress in building and developing the twin worlds, their races, cultures and traditions. This project will explore my own take on the standard fantasy setting inspired by Lord of the Rings, Conan the Barbarian, and the many, many, many books, tabletop games and video games they inspired. One of the major differences between my world and many of its contemporaries is I chose to make the setting pseudo-Renaissance instead of pseudo-medieval. This choice was made due to my burning hatred of the trope of medieval stasis and my desire to explore other set periods to create a fantasy setting. While Ilion does lean more into traditional medieval fantasy, it's still a world capable of growth and change. The twin worlds are home to 6 races, loosely inspired by those common in Tolkienesque fantasy. First are the Gomon, who are the most adaptable and widespread of the 6 races. Their settlements span nearly every continent, flourishing wherever the land can sustain life. They've established cities, farms, and monuments across both worlds. I created them as this world equivalent of humans, focusing on their versatility and adaptability as defining traits. Unlike other races who live in more specialised habitats, Gomons can thrive almost anywhere. After the Sundering, when the first people began reclaiming the land, the Gomon quickly established themselves, resulting in the largest and most well-developed settlements among all the races. Beneath the Rocky Mountains lies the halls of the Hadric. When the Sundering tore the world apart, the Hadric endured the chaos in their subterranean cities, offering shelter to survivors of the other races during those dark days. Their generosity is still remembered and honoured across both worlds into the present. I feel fantasy writers often make dwarves simply because Tolkien did, and it's expected that fantasy settings include dwarves. But I feel this can lead to dwarvish cultures feeling copy-pasted and underdeveloped, And I really wanted to explore how an entirely subterranean society might function, what foods they could cultivate, and how would their environment shape their culture and way of life. The Therian are shapeshifters inspired by fantasy races that fit the wild man archetype, such as werewolves and orcs. They are shapeshifters and their transformations are tied to the lunar cycles, but debris from the Sundering created 3 additional moons, with different Therians syncing to specific moons, leading to staggered and chaotic transformation cycles across their society. This has fostered a culture of divisions. Those tied to the primary moon, with predictable transformations, often put themselves into positions of lead power, using the narratives that they are the more physically and mentally stable, while Therians influenced by the newer moons are seen as erratic and less trusted. Deep in the forest, far from civilization, is the home of the Sylvan. Born from the union of a nature spirit and a mortal, they are the longest lived race, with many who survived the Sundering still alive in the present. The event nearly drove them to extinction. Once thriving, their population was decimated, and now the Sylvan are a rarity, regarded little more than a legend by the other races, and elusive as the spirit from which they descend. In the vast oceans dwells a Merrow. Growing up, I loved mermaids. Ariel was my favourite princess, and the Ingo books were among my most beloved reads. However, when I grew up and started to transition to reading adult high fantasy, it was disappointing to see that mermaids were often relegated to background details, with little exploration of their cultures. Merrow culture is primarily built around thermal vents and undersea volcanoes, as they live so deep underwater they carve themselves. An unusual aspect of their society is the practice of grafting, a process in which a Merrow implants coral buds and polyps into their own flesh, cultivating them to gain enhanced abilities and strength. The final race are the Shardkin, and my attempt to reinterpret elves. The way fantasy writers often treat elves fascinated me, often being written to be superior to other races, even in contradictory ways, like they are pacifists without a standing army, who have enjoyed centuries of peace, but still outclass everyone in combat and strategy. I think the perfection of elves would be interesting to deconstruct, and that is the angle I am choosing to approach creating the Shardkin race and culture. They boast the highest concentration of magic users, and the most distinctive feature is the crystalline skeleton, which protrudes through their skin and serves as the conduit for their magic. While the 2 worlds are now almost wholly separated, travel and communication between them is still possible. There are points where the walls of reality are thinner, and it is possible to cross over into the Fane, a realm of spirits, small gods, and that mirrors the physical world. While Tellus was destroyed, its counterpart in the Fane survived. However, with the loss of its twin, it has become unanchored, twisting in on itself and turning more and more treacherous by the day. Those brave enough to cross between Trovia and Ilion through the Fane risk losing themselves, strange visions and haunted echoes, and those native to this realm are increasingly at risk of succumbing to growing corruption. There is, however, a second road between the worlds, but it is almost as dangerous as the Fane to outsiders. The Cloudsea Isles is a path of floating debris, slowly colonised by plants, animal and people, that connects the 2 worlds, has grown a vibrant and fiercely independent culture, ruled by a Grand Admiral. The Isles have faced many attempts to conquer and colonise them by countries and empires of both worlds, seeking to secure travel and trade routes. I chose to make my setting a binary planet system because it's a surprisingly underexplored setting in fantasy and science fiction world building. The dynamics between the 2 worlds, locked in one another's orbit, create fertile ground for storytelling possibilities. Gravitational interactions like shifting tides, tremors and climate effects introduce unpredictability that can serve as dynamic set pieces for characters to navigate. From a thematic perspective, the binary planet system can be a very blunt visual metaphor for my focus on duality and how slightly different starting points can lead to radically different conclusions. Trovia and Ilion are interconnected, 2 halves of a whole that can never fully reunite. The way a setting can feed into, reinforce or challenge the story streams is something I wanted to explore when creating the Twin Worlds. Discworld is a fantasy series I love that has a unique world that reinforces its overarching themes of the power of story and narrative by creating a world that could not exist in a place more real than fiction. I'm a very visual person, so when starting out on the Twin Worlds project, I knew it would be an art and visual first, and a binary planet system opened up opportunities for unique and breathtaking visuals. Imagine standing on a mountain and seeing the other planet rise over the horizon like a second moon, its continents faintly visible through swirling clouds, or a sky illuminated by the reflected light of your sister world, casting its glow over oceans, forests and deserts. I wanted to create a sense of awe and wanderlust in people, and a desire to explore this world I have created. A criticism I've seen come up increasingly often against high fantasy especially ones where the hero's goal is to save the world, is that the stakes are so high that the authors themselves cannot afford for the hero to lose and risk destroying their worlds they've spent so much time lovingly crafting, or risk giving the audience an unsatisfying ending. The germinating ideas that eventually led to the creation of the Twin Worlds was what if they didn't? What if the hero lost, and the crazed maniac whose life goal was to end the world, as we know, actually succeeded? What happens next? This would also run the time that Isaac Arthur released his video on binary or Trojan Planet, and I had my answer to what would happen next. A genre that had almost as big an influence of me as high fantasy was post-apocalypses. Sue me, as a teenage girl who liked reading in the 2010s, it was practically unavoidable. Thinking about it, post-apocalypses are thematically kind of the opposite of high fantasy. The worst had already happened, the world is broken, and the people left behind aren't trying to stop the disaster, they're trying to live with it. What does survival, hope look like when everything familiar is gone? How do people rebuild, adapt, or cope when the unthinkable has already happened? How would this affect the civilizations that would spring up after the Sundering? I fell in love with creating a post-apocalyptic high fantasy setting, and my imagination was ignited by the idea of it like nothing else. I have a terrible habit of getting bored and abandoning projects after a few months, but my mind kept returning to Twin Worlds. I kept catching myself doodling ideas for characters or coming up with concepts for unique civilization that could only arise on a binary planet system. And that is what I aim to achieve with this project. The Twin Worlds of Trovia and Ilion are a setting I really want to explore and develop. Through this channel, I aim to explore the Twin Worlds, cultures, conflicts, and characters. We'll uncover the secrets of their shattered histories, trace the paths of their divergent futures, and explore themes of tradition, progress, and what it means to find beauty in a broken world. Whether through exploration of cultures, maps that chart the scars left by Sundering, or narrated short stories of the people of the Twin Worlds and their adventures, my goal is to bring the setting to life as vividly as I am able. If you ever looked at the star-filled sky and wondered about the worlds that could be, or marvelled at the stories of civilizations lost to time, and dreamt of what they might have left behind, then I invite you to join me. Together, we'll wander the Trovian valleys, sail Ilion's oceans, and brave the haunting echoes of the Fane. This is a journey of creation and discovery, and I can't wait to see where it takes us. Welcome to Twin Worlds. Welcome to the adventure.